It's Adrienne Lawrence back at you on TYT's The Conversation, and now here to talk about some voting issues that have been coming up and are not very progressive. I'm joined by Kat Calvin, founder of Spread the Vote and Project ID. Thanks for joining us, Kat.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, so I know that the US Supreme Court recently waged an assault on voting rights, and it kind of seemed to hit a new low with this ruling that threw out Wisconsin's redrawn electoral map. Why was this ruling so shocking?
Well, it wasn't shocking to anyone, I think, who's been paying attention for the last several years. Ever since the Supreme Court started striking down pieces of the Voting Rights Act in 2013, and then again, over and over again, all into 2020. The rulings of the Supreme Court have made it pretty clear that the majority is not here to fight for voting rights, and so I don't really ever find one of their rulings surprising, because they're following a pattern that we've seen them follow for a while.
Yes, and that is something that's very unfortunate, especially because we're supposed to have this whole democracy thing, whatever that means. But as far as Wisconsin goes with that redrawn map, it's my understanding that the redrawn map it would have included a Black community. Is that correct?
Yeah, as far as I'm clear, it would have included a Black community. I think that the thing that we're seeing with redistricting, and that the Supreme Court has confirmed, is that there are so many ways that you can claim or pretend that your redistricting is not based on race, even when it is, that the courts are willing to accept that you can cut out whole Black communities or communities of other colors or whatever, and say, oh, well, it's not because of race, it's because of these other things. They're all don't cut their lawns well, or they're all it's all based on partisan. You're allowed to gerrymander based on political party, et cetera. And so you can make all these excuses, and then what we're seeing is that the courts are going to uphold it.
Yes, and that's something that I know none of us want, who actually do want everyone to have access to vote. And something else with this Wisconsin decision, I know that did shock some people, in part because you kind of wonder how long they're going to do this, but they essentially issued it in somewhat of an emergency ruling using the shadow docket, that docket that's typically used for inconsequential matters. And a ruling like this would definitely seem to be of consequence. But I guess, what are your thoughts on why you think the court opted to use the shadow docket here?
So I, as you probably remember, Bush v. Gore, and when the Supreme Court was like, we're gonna issue this ruling, but don't let it count for any precedent. It's just this one time, it doesn't really matter. And so again, this thing where I'm like, we've been here before. I think that we are at a place where the Supreme Court, and certainly we've seen with sort of particular new members, they have an agenda. We've seen this now with Ginny Thomas, right? Like, the days of us being able to pretend that these are objective, nonpartisan justices that are here for the good of the country, like we can't pretend that anymore. And what we're seeing now is that they're not above pulling sort of sneaky measures in order to hope maybe no one will pay attention to this, right? Or to hope that well, if we say that we're bringing down this ruling, but that there shouldn't be any precedent here. This is just this one time. It's just an emergency. That it will avoid scrutiny, which in the day of 24-hour news, I don't know how they think that's possible. But we're very much in this place where and I think we are realizing, and Congress obviously has realized, like, oh, the Supreme Court is not the Supreme Court that we thought we had, that we designed to have, that is impartial, that is objective, that is nonpartisan. In fact, we have some actors here who very much have an agenda, and they will go to any lengths to get that agenda, push that agenda forward, even if it's using really unusual and shocking measures, like saying that this is some sort of inconsequential emergency measure when it very clearly is not.
No, it's not. And the thing is, you're absolutely right in terms of the Supreme Court. It lost any kind of legitimacy that it had. I think there were differing opinions on which judges were legitimate at certain times during kind of the Supreme Court history in more recent years. But now it's just this overarching theme and thought that the Supreme Court is really just an extension of the Republican Party and the GOP, as opposed to an actually independent body that is supposed to objectively interpret the law. And we also saw that in this recent Wisconsin opinion by virtue of the fact that the Supreme Court has embraced this thing they call the Purcell Rule or Purcell Principle, kind of this general idea that courts shouldn't intervene in election disputes when it's close to an election time. And they seem to have no issue straying here as well. I really think that this is impacting how people vote and also whether they vote. Is that something you're finding?
I am. I mean, to me, this is absolutely terrifying on a lot of levels. Not having a legitimate Supreme Court is really scary. When I was in law school, I had a Supreme Court calendar, and I'd be like, "Happy birthday, Lord," and and like it was the Supreme Court, right? Like that's the thing we have. You may not trust Congress, you may not trust the president, but we trust SCOTUS. And so for that to be gone, I think, we're in a place now very clearly where we're seeing people either move to wild extremes on either side of the line or just give up, because why does it matter, right? You can elect people who aren't going to change anything. You have a Supreme Court that's not going to uphold justice. There are a lot of people who are really just giving up. We talk to people about voting every day, and a lot of people who've never voted, and when we try to talk to them about voting, they're like, yeah, but why should we? Nothing happens, no one changes anything, and you can't trust any of the institutions. And it's difficult to argue that, and we talk a lot about local elections and how important those are, because when you talk to people about national politics, it's not only disheartening, but it's scary. And it's something that needs to be changed and fixed quickly, but that there is no quick change for. And I don't know, for me, it definitely keeps me up at night.
Yeah, and I'm happy to know that you are just as much as a nerd as I was when it comes to because I remember when Antonin Scalia died, like it felt like I was punched in the gut, and I loathed the man. But still, it's like, this is a Supreme Court, this is a justice, and it was the first justice to die on my watch, I thought. Now I just look at these, these 9 up here, and I'm like, well, like it's like, okay, this is what we're doing. It definitely seems to have lost any sense of legitimacy as well as any kind of respect. It's pretty disgusting. And also what's pretty disgusting is what's going on out in Ohio, where there's a proposed law that would require state voters to show photo identification at the polls. This would seem to create just another nonsensical barrier to voter access, right?
I mean, look, everybody knows by now, if anything, because I've been shouting it from the rooftops, and I assume everybody's listening to me, that voter ID laws are, absurd. We've proven over and over and over again, voter fraud isn't happening at the polls. We know for a fact because we have videos and quotes of people saying we need voter ID laws because it'll stop poor people from voting, because it'll stop brown people from voting, et cetera. My organization every single day gets IDs. I'm in my car because I just took a bunch of unhoused people to the DMV so that they can have IDs for everything they need, but also to vote. And, it is such a great way to prevent the over 21 million eligible voters in this country who don't have ID from voting, who happen to usually be unemployed or underemployed, who usually are returning citizens, who are unhoused, who are elderly, all of these different demographics that people in power, honestly, on both sides of the aisle would like to prevent from voting to vote. And we have state after state after state that is deciding to implement these laws, knowing full well that they have nothing to do with voter fraud and everything to do with voter exclusion.
Yeah, definitely. It's just how the founding fathers intended it. White male property owners, i.e. white men with money, that's who they wanted to vote. So, seriously, and also, because I had read that it's not, like you had mentioned, it's not that people are voting illegally in Ohio, that the state data reported 0.0005% of the nearly 6 million votes in the 2020 election were fraudulent, and that individual was caught, or those 3 or 4 individuals were caught. And so It's like, let's just be honest about what's really happening here, but it's the same thing we're seeing with the whole CRT in schools. It's not even happening in schools, but you're passing these laws out here because there's actually an agenda, and that's the suppression of marginalized peoples.
Exactly.
But in terms of your organization and what you do, what other kind of initiatives are you working on right now in addition to taking unhoused people to the DMV to be able to get voter IDs or identification for themselves?
So we help all sorts of folks, folks who are unhoused, returning citizens, elderly, a lot of young people. We work with the Detroit public schools because quite a lot of high schoolers are getting out of high school and they can't get the IDs they need to start their lives. And so we do that. A lot of our work is focused on IDs. We also have a program called Vote by Mail in Jail because there are actually hundreds of thousands of people who are incarcerated, either because they've been convicted of misdemeanors or more likely because they've been jailed pre-trial because they just are too poor to afford bail, who can vote. And so we run a national program to help people who are in jail be able to vote while they're incarcerated, which they have the right to do. But outside of Vermont and Maine, who are great, there aren't a lot of places that are really helping them do it. Our goal is to help people get the IDs they need for their lives, but then also to help the people who almost never have the opportunity to vote, either because they don't have IDs, because it's so impossible for them, because of the micro barriers we put up, because they're incarcerated, to be able to make their voices heard at the polls.
All right, and I know the midterms are not that far away. They kind of just seem right around the corner, as well as there are a lot of other elections going around. Is there anything that you all are going to be invested in the next few months that you want to get the word out about?
Yeah, my big thing is, I get it, people are exhausted. We've had 3 really draining elections in the last few years, but enthusiasm around this election is really down. And folks, it's midterms, it's important, it matters. There are over 200,000 races around the country. If you're not interested in Congress, your city council person is probably running, or your mayor, and we've got to get people to understand that we can't just give up. We really have to keep fighting.
All right, and so if people want to find out more about you, follow your work, where can they catch you on social media?
At Spread the Vote US on all channels.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the work that you do. It's so incredibly important that people do get out to vote. I know they haven't seen necessarily the results that they've wanted in the last few years, but we gotta fight ahead, otherwise we could lose everything. So thank you so much for joining us, Kat Calvin, that's a founder of Spread the Vote Project ID. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.